And then once it goes live, you can just share it. So go here. Yep, go ahead, whatever you want.
I was going to say, are those just free?
It should be live.
Okay.
Just wait for it to try to find it on there and then share it to the page. All right. How's everybody doing?
We are doing so great.
Doing phenomenal.
We're so looking forward.
Okay, perfect. Me too. So obviously, we're going to talk about the immune system today. I want it to be a little bit interactive. The slides are a little bit heavy, so I'm probably going to skip through a bunch of them. And that way we can get to the good stuff that you guys all want to learn about, which is how you can support your immune system. So if I'm skipping through stuff super fast and there's a slide that looks interesting to you and you just really want to know about that chemical reaction that happens in the body, we can dive into it a little bit more. But I'd say generally I'm going to try to keep it pretty light and kind of simple because it's very complex stuff that we're going to talk about with the immune system today. So first off, before we can talk about the immune system, we've got to define what it is. So who thinks they have a good understanding of what the immune system is?
Oh boy, I knew you were going to ask me.
Someone has. You sit in the back, you're going to get called on. That's the way it goes.
How to describe it? Well, it's like your innate, how you react to certain foreign pathogens.
Foreign pathogens. You know, it's almost like I paid you to say foreign pathogens because
Wow. Wait,
the-
is that actually right?
well, we're going to find out. But the medical definition of the immune system is very centered around the body's response to external or foreign invaders. So there you go. The U.S. National Library of Medicine defines it as a complex network of cells, tissues, and organs that work together to defend against germs. Germs, of course, being a fancy word for foreign pathogens, right? The U.S. National Library of Medicine, oh, there you go. So it's a collection of structures and processes that protect against disease or other damaging foreign bodies. Good job, Lauren. Protects against viruses, bacteria, and parasites. So again, the whole medical definition, everything that we have always been taught and trained on with the immune system is our body's response and protection against things that are in the external environment. But if we're only focused on the body's response to bacteria, viruses, parasites, it doesn't really help us explain why there's hundreds of trillions of bacteria that actually live within our bodies. So our gut is colonized by about, like I said, 100 trillion bacteria. We have to have those bacteria for normal health. And so then how does the immune system start to then differentiate between what's good and what's bad? So that's obviously a little bit more complex than just recognizing this is not supposed to be here or this is a foreign bacteria or germ, whatever. We also have these really cool things called bacteriophages. So bacteriophages are actually part of our body's immune system, but it's not our body, right? So we have viruses that live within our body, within our intestinal wall and things like that. And those viruses are part of the immune system and they go after foreign bacteria. So we have these other cell types that are not our own body, our own cell, that act in unison with our immune system to help protect us, essentially. So if our immune system just simply went after viruses and bacteria, then it wouldn't be possible to have trillions of other bacteria and viruses living inside of our body and helping support normal everyday jobs, right? So we have to come up with a new definition. The problem is the medical definition here, it's just talking about the cells and molecules. Our body invests heavily in cells dedicated to defense. So our body's very toxic, or our environments are very toxic. If we didn't have a strong immune system, we wouldn't be able to defend against that. The problem is that the medical definition of immunity, it's not well defined and it's based solely on infectious agents. So when it comes to coming up with a new definition here, we've got to say, the immune system is really the mechanisms used by the body. So it's not just our body's internal cells. It's this other extracellular network, bacteria and viruses that live within us. So it's all the mechanisms used as protection against environmental agents, which can be both internal and external, that are foreign to the body. So the agents can be microorganisms or the chemical products, foods, chemicals, drugs, pollen, animals, or abnormal cells. And abnormal cells is a really important piece of the immune system as well, because our body's constantly turning over and creating new cells. Not every one of those cells is formed perfectly, and that's what we call a tumor or a cancer cell. And so when we have those cells that are not formed properly, the immune system's job is also to recognize this cell wasn't formed the way it's supposed to and clear those cells out. So when we have cancers and tumors that grow, it's a failure of the immune system to recognize and identify that those cells are not formed properly and clear them out. So we have to understand the immune system's response to that as well. So today what we're going to talk about is a couple different things. So we'll talk about what the new definition of the immune system is that we just discussed, how the immune system responds and adapts to the environment, how medicine treats the immune system, what weakens that immune response, how to build a strong immune response, and how we can actually measure that. And I'm realizing now that the air conditioner is set to turn off at 6 o'clock and it's going to get really hot in here. So I'm going to turn it back on real quick so we don't all roast. I know. I'm already getting hot up there and it's, yeah, see? I know some of you psychos probably like it at 78 degrees right now, but. What?
68 is prime.
Okay, there we go. Now I can focus. You can't focus if it's can't focus if it's hot. Okay, so how does our body respond and adapt to the environment? So typically what we think about, and this was kind of hailed from the rooftops during COVID, is that we have to protect the elderly because our immune system weakens as we age. This is what everybody's always taught and trained on, is that, you know, kids have these strong, robust immune systems. As we get older, the immune system starts to fall apart. You know, the COVID vaccine, the whole thing, don't get the vaccine because you need it for yourself. Get it because you need to protect grandma and the immunocompromised and all these other people. Unfortunately, you know, that could not be further from the truth. In fact, the way the immune system works is that we are weakest when we're young. And if we do everything right through our life and take care of our bodies and protect ourselves, that immune system should actually strengthen and get stronger. The problem is that the key there is if we do all the right things. How many people in this room do the right things? Yes.
And I'm 76.
There you go. And you're probably not afraid to shake my hand and go out in public
That's right.
because you do all the right things. And how many people do you know that all do the right things?
I don't really.
That's all right.
I don't really. I was kind
You were lying. Okay, well, you know, that's fine. But society as a whole, we're not all doing the right things. We're sicker than we ever have been before. And so unfortunately, what should happen is not happening. And that's why we're in the situation where we are, where we're sicker than we were before. We have things like COVID that come through and sweep through the entire country, and we can't get a handle on it. And so we want to understand, if we want to protect ourselves, what can we start to do now before we get sick, before we go into these environments where it's possible to get sick, to protect ourselves? That we have to understand how that immune system works. So what we're going to talk about, two different pieces here. So the first piece is kind of this top part of the shield there that you are born with. That's called our adaptive or our innate immune response. So that's what's inborn within us. And then we have this part that slowly develops as we age, and that's called the adaptive immune system. And the big thing there is that it adapts and responds to the environment. And so as we age, we have more interactions with viruses and bacteria and parasites and pathogens. And so our body responds and adapts to those, and we get stronger as a result of that. So how does this work? Immune system is broken into a couple different parts. So we've got the innate immune system over here on the left side. The innate immune system, again, is what we're born with. It's innate, inborn within us. And the adaptive immune system, or the acquired immune system. There's two pieces up and down here. So the top part is the protection part, and then we have the eradication part. So we have to have all of these working in unison and in coordination with each other in order to have a proper, healthy immune response. So the protection part, the innate inborn cells, basically we have these cell types that float around. They recognize things that are not us, and they engulf them, and they start to signal to other cells in the body. So again, I'm going to go super brief through all this because it's not super important that you know it, but basically we have certain cell types right here, which we'll talk a little bit about in a couple slides. Those cell types are the first line recognition of something that's not supposed to be here, or something that's not self. They signal to our acquired immune system in the protection stage. That's where we have these CD4 helper T cells and B cells, or antibodies. When we're talking about medical intervention and medical system focusing on protection of the immune system, a lot of times that comes with vaccines. You know, it's cold and flu season, go get the flu vaccine, get the COVID vaccine, get the mumps and measles vaccine. That's all focused on creating a B cell response. So they're focusing on this one tiny little piece of the immune system, and bypassing the rest of the immune response. So it's important, again, to understand if we want to have a proper healthy immune response, if we want to actually train this adaptive immunity, we've got to have all these signaling pathways that take place in proper order. This is the protection part. If we just have this part, we're not going to actually get rid of infection. So we have to have this other step as well. We have these really cool cells called natural killer cells, which basically go after and kill everything that's not self. They're very important for tumor suppression and surveillance of a lot of different types of cell types. And then we have a very specific part of our immune system over here with specified T lymphocytes, which are like the SWAT team that go in after a certain type of infection. And again, this all signals to each other. So if we just focus on one piece right here and bypass the rest of it, we cannot have a proper adaptive immune response. So let's look at what the different layers of the immune system are. So there's three main layers of the immune system. We have our barriers, the barrier immune response, the innate immune response, and then the acquired immune response. So barrier immune function can be broken down into physical barriers, chemical barriers, and biological barriers. So physical barriers, think about your skin. The goal is the immune system is designed to go after things that come into our body, right? So the first line of defense is not allowing things to come into or enter our body. So we've got the physical barriers. That can be mucosal barriers as well. Chemical barriers, think about things like your stomach acid. If you eat things, the food you eat has different things on it that are pathogenic, essentially. And so the stomach acid, in addition to breaking down our food, also neutralizes a lot of those infectious agents that we may get into our body through food. And then we have biological barriers, which are going to be like the microbial environment in our gut, in our nasal passages, in our sinuses, on our eyes, all of that stuff. So we've got to have healthy barrier function if we want the immune system to function properly. So that barrier immune response happens basically anywhere the internal and the external environment come together. So our respiratory tract, our GI tract, our genital urinary tract, and then our upper sinus, nose, and pharynx area, and also on our eyes. So taking care of those barriers is important, and we'll talk about things that we can do at the end to help support all the barrier function there. The innate immune response here. Innate immune response is that, again, that inborn immune system. It's made up of a bunch of different cell types. The cell types all do different things. They all come from stem cells, which are found in our bone marrow. Again, this is the stuff we're going to skip over because it's not that important. When we're testing a complete blood count, we can test all of these immune cells right here. It's a very simple $5 test. It's done all the time. Every single blood panel that we run in our office has a complete blood count on it. So the white blood cells right up here are going to be all of the immune fighting cells in our body. And if we look at this differential, it breaks down all the different types of immune cells that do different things. So this is a really good example of someone up here. You can see that the white blood cell count at 2.7 is flagged as low. And when that white blood cell count drops low like that, that's typically a good sign that there's some sort of chronic infection or stress on the body. I always say stress is kind of like driving your car 100 miles an hour. It's fine and dandy while you're going down the highway, but eventually if you don't take your foot off the pedal, you're going to run out of gas on the side of the road. And so when we look at a complete blood count like this and we see white blood cells super low, which I see all the time, that's an indicator that there's some sort of chronic stress on the body that's just wearing down those chemical pathways and depleting the immune system. And so this is a person right away we know we've got to try to figure out what is putting stress on that immune system and then take the stress away so that the body can start to restore and function the way it's supposed to again. So when we look at all these different cell types here, again, I'm going to skip over a lot of this stuff because it's not super important. Neutrophils, the main thing is those go after bacterial infections. Mast cells are going to be kind of inflammatory mediator cells. So they're going to release histamine and they're going to signal other pieces of that immune system to come in. Basophils mainly going to go after parasites, eosinophils, parasites, and allergic responses. Monocytes are going to be the first line immune defense that lives at the barriers. And then dendritic cells are going to be signaling cells that call in those other pieces of the immune response. So the one thing we didn't talk about, natural killer cells. If we go back and look at our complete blood count here, we've got our eosinophils, basophils, granulocytes, lymphocytes, monocytes, but we don't have natural killer cells. And the reason we don't have natural killer cells, unfortunately, is because medicine doesn't fully understand what natural killer cells do. They also don't have drugs and medications and surgeries that can influence them. And unfortunately, we get into this situation where in the medical system, you've got to come up with a diagnosis. You've got to run blood work that you can fix things. Once you have a diagnosis, you've got to be able to then treat that diagnosis. So unfortunately, a lot of times we aren't running things that give us answers that we don't have solutions for. And so the medical system doesn't really understand natural killer cells that well. There's a lot more research coming out about them, but it's not part of a general CBC here, unfortunately. However, we have to understand that that plays a very important part in that adaptive, in that immune response there. So what do natural killer cells do? So they don't go after microbes. Natural killer cells go after our own defective cells. So natural killer cells, aka tumor suppressor cells, because they're going to recognize everything that's not self. So if we think about how does our body and our immune system differentiate between our healthy tissue and foreign invaders, is think about all of our healthy cells. Think about a little white flag that says, hey, I'm Connor, I'm supposed to be here. Anything that doesn't have that white flag is not supposed to be there, and our immune system's job is to identify that and get rid of it. So if we're making healthy Connor cells, all those cells have that white flag. Anything that doesn't have it, the natural killer cells are going to go after. So in a couple slides, we'll talk about specific immune responses to specific viruses like the COVID virus or the flu virus or the cold or things like that. These can help clear those out, but it doesn't have to be primed or activated by a different part of the immune system, so they survey and clean up any cellular debris that's not supposed to be there. Type of immune cells that have granulars that can kill tumor cells. So natural killer cells, again, even the Natural Cancer Institute recognizes that they're very important for that tumor suppression response. But again, it's not part of our normal testing of the immune system. First notice for their ability to kill tumor cells without priming or prior activation, which means that they can function. Uh-oh. Is your phone ringing right now? Children. Okay.
Muting my nest, so I don't do that.
Okay. We also have our acquired immune response. So acquired immune response, not present as at birth, and this develops. Oh my goodness.
I'm muting everything right now. Sorry.
Okay. So acquired immune response develops in response to infections. So we're going to go through an analogy here that's going to help understand the different layers of this acquired immune response, so that when we talk about how to support it later on, we understand where that support's coming from. So I always use the bank robber analogy. If we think about a bank, it has all the different components that our immune system would have to try to prevent robbers from coming in and getting away with all the gold. So if we talk about that first line of defense, that barrier defense, banks have external doors. They have teller counters with screens on them. They've got another door that blocks the vaults. They've got all these different barriers. And so if I'm on the outside of the bank and I want to get into the vault to get all the money, I have to get past all those barriers. So easiest time to do that is when the bank is open and the doors are wide open and the tellers are there and the vault doors open and all the things, right? So bank robber comes into the bank. First line of defense in our immune system are these macrophages or dendritic cells. Easiest way to think about that in the bank robber analogy is the tellers that are sitting behind the counter. So tellers are sitting there, people are coming in and out all day long doing normal business, everything's fine and dandy, and then all of a sudden someone comes in that doesn't look like all the other people that have been coming into the bank. They've got a mask, they've got a gun, they've got a big old bag over their shoulder, and the teller instantly recognizes that person is not like all the other people. And so what the teller is going to do is they're going to hit the silent alarm. That silent alarm is going to ring to the 911 dispatching center, who's going to be able to start coordinating that response. The 911 dispatching center in our body are these really cool cells called T helper cells or CD4 cells. The CD4 cells are then going to start to stimulate a bunch of other responses. So the 911 dispatching center is going to get the call. They're going to call in the SWAT team. The SWAT team is going to get camera footage from the bank. They're going to have a picture of exactly what that bank robber looks like so that they can walk into the bank and they're going to leave all the hostages alone and only take care of the bad guy. So those CD8 cells, those cytotoxic T cells, the SWAT team, they have to be activated. When we talk about the immune system, we call that priming. So the SWAT team isn't just wandering around the streets on a daily basis looking for guys to go after. They've got to get the call. They've got to know exactly what they're doing to go in and clear out that specific thing. Whereas our natural killer cells, in this analogy, the natural killer cells are just the police that are roaming around the streets looking for people stealing grandma's purse, people breaking into cars, people robbing the ATM. So they're looking for anything that's not normal. So they can come in and they can help clean that up. But really, if we have a big hostage situation, the beat cop walking down the street's not going to be the guy for the job. We have to call in that specific primed and activated bank robber, or the primed and activated SWAT team. So CD4 cells, we know about these cells. These are very highly researched cells. The problem is that when the medical system's looking at CD4 and CD8 cells, or the T helper cells, the SWAT team and the 911 dispatching center, they're always looking for that in the complex or the context of HIV and AIDS. And that's when this was really kind of discovered, was through HIV research. So HIV is human immunodeficiency virus. So that's going to knock out all of that part of the immune system. When we have HIV, we don't die from HIV. We die from some other immune system disease or weakness, essentially. And so we know that these cell types are very important for that, but they're very important for anything that those T lymphocytes go after, which again is virally infected cells and cancer cells. So I ask patients to get this blood work run all the time. We run and look at these things all the time in the office. A lot of times patients want to get their insurance to cover stuff. So they go to their primary care doc. And I have patients that come back all the time and they say, yeah, I gave that list of things that you wanted me to run to my primary care doc. And they told me that you don't have AIDS. There's no reason for us to run this. It's just so frustrating because there is a very important reason to run this, because we want to know what the immune system's ability to do things are. If we know that the bank is going to get robbed, don't you think it's a better idea to make sure that the SWAT team is dispatched or is sitting there ready to go, that there's someone that's going to answer the phone at the 911 dispatching center? We can't just wait for someone to walk into the bank and the teller to hit the button and then hope that those people are working that day. We can test it, and then we can look at where we're at and we can work to support those things. So CD4 T lymphocytes help coordinate the immune response by stimulating other cells or priming and activating those cells, things like macrophages, B lymphocytes, and CD8 T lymphocytes.
Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
When I look at the word acquired, it means it's something that you have taken in at
Correct.
some point. It's not something you're born with.
Correct.
This is something that we are going to acquire, and you're going to tell us how
Yes.
we're going to acquire it. Is that correct?
So every time that my body comes into or interacts with a different virus or a different bacteria, I'm acquiring more immune system responses, basically.
Okay, gotcha.
And that comes
That
through.
word was troubling me because it's like
Yes.
you're not born
And-
with it. You acquire it because
Correct.
of what's coming into you.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And that comes through B cells. So B cells are going to be antibodies. And there's another analogy. And I don't remember if I talk about it now or later, but if it comes up later, we'll cover it now since we're talking about it. But remember, we went back to the 4 boxes, and we had the protection and we had the eradication. So we have to have both pieces of those. B cells are very important. So are cytotoxic T cells and natural killer cells. This is the eradication. This is the deactivation, the protection, that's everything. So B cells, what those are going to do is they're going to clump a bunch of those viruses together, which is going to make it easier for our T cells to get rid of them. So the analogy I always use is the garbage collector. So we all understand that, you know, everybody in your house, your job is to put the trash into bags, put the bags into a big trash dumpster, that goes out to the curb, and then the garbage guy comes around once or twice a week and they pick it all up. They take it to the landfill. And so in that analogy, the dumpsters are the B cells, the natural killer cells are going to be the garbage guy. And what happens is if the garbage guy comes around, but nobody puts their trash in the trash can and puts it out to the curb, and the garbage guy has to go into every single person's house and empty every individual trash can, it's going to slow that process so down that trash is going to pile up everywhere. On the other side of that, if everybody puts the trash out to the curb, but the garbage guy never comes around, again, it's going to all pile up on the street, and we're not going to get it seamlessly to the dumpster or the dump where it needs to go. So it's important to have both sides of that immune response. Again, the medical system is very heavily focused on B cell antibodies, but what we'll talk about is if we artificially manipulate and stimulate this response, it comes at the expense of this response. So we're only focusing on B cells without caring about what's going on with those other cell types. And I actually have blood work that we'll look at that shows somebody who was just vaccinated and how bad their immune response was after that. So where are we at? Just a bunch of research on what we just talked about. Again, I don't want to focus too much on that. Okay, so this is the blood work. So this was a patient that came in a couple of years ago when COVID vaccines were just coming out, and he was forced to get the vaccine. I shouldn't say forced because nobody was forced. It was just, the threat of losing your job and not being able to feed your family. But anyways, that's not force. Yeah, so he had to get the vaccine. He did not want to. He knew it was going to have a negative impact on his immune system. So he came into the office so we could run the testing that we just talked about, look at all those different cell types, see where things are at, and then work to rebuild that. And so you can't read all this stuff, but what you can see is low, 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 high. That's only high because that's a percentage. Everything else is low, so something has to look high, and low. So we're looking at all the different cell types here. So we talked about the CD4 cells. We can test that right here. Low in CD4 cells. His CD8 cells, the SWAT team, low in those. His natural killer cells were actually in an okay range. But again, if we look at that adaptive or that acquired immune response right here, it's these two cell types, the CD8 cells and the CD4 cells, that are super important in that priming piece. And he got the vaccine, which increased his B cells, but it was at the expense of decreasing those lymphocytes. And so in this case, all the trash is going out to the curb, which is great, but the dumpster or the garbage guys are on holiday having fun at the beach, right? So not super helpful for that patient. So we'll talk about what that looks like. I've got his post labs, I think, in here later on. We'll talk about that. But again, we've got to have every single piece of this working in coordination. We can't just come in and manipulate a certain piece without having a negative impact on other pieces of the puzzle there. So what is an antibody? This is, we'll talk about that. But an antibody is just a class of protein called an immunoglobulin. It's made by white blood cells to identify and neutralize foreign material. So key there, identification and neutralization, but not eradication. So it's going to make it easier for the other piece of the immune system to come in and do its job, but that is not the only thing that's going to help. So what's going to happen is we've got an antigen. Remember that white flag that my cells are waving around? Well, every cell has all these proteins. Everybody became familiar with them during COVID, called spike proteins. All cells have these protein molecules on the outside that are what allow our body to identify them. And so the antigen is going to be that spike protein or the flag that's on the outside. The antibody is going to be very specific for one single cell type. So that's why we call it an acquired response, because in order to create an antibody, we have to first come into contact with the antigen. If I've never seen a virus before, my body is not going to have antibodies for it. Once I've come in contact to it, now I'll have antibodies for it. And so the next time my body sees that, I already have those antibodies built. We can start to clump all that stuff together. The immune system can get a head start, and it's not going to be as damaging to my body. So we form this antigen-antibody complex. It inactivates, and then it actually helps with this complement signaling cascade, which is going to signal and call in all of those other troops so that we can speed that response up. So it's very important that we have that antibody response. This is kind of what it looks like. We've got all these different viruses floating around. Antibodies come in, they clump everything together. Mr. Pac-Man can come in and then bind and eliminate. But we have to have Mr. Pac-Man and we have to have the antibody complex there if we want that to happen appropriately. So we know now, this is not as relevant as the talk was in 2021 when all this was first happening, but now we know that the antibodies are not, or the antibodies aren't going to create this long-term immunity, which is why you got to get the original injection, then you got to get all these boosters. And they're so focused on having this high antibody response all the time. The problem is that that's not the way the body actually works. Antibodies are not meant to always be elevated. They're meant to be elevated during an infection, and then they gradually come back down to lower levels, and then they can come back up if we have the same infection come again. But we're not meant to have these antibodies sustained at high levels. This was an email that I got from the Florida Department of Health, just letting us know that people who got vaccines were actually more susceptible to COVID after 4 to 6 months than those who did not get the COVID vaccine, which, makes total sense, right? Negative effectiveness. So, sweet. Okay, so how does medicine treat this? Again, this is the way the body works. We have these different types of antibodies. The first antibody type that's going to spike in response to an infection is this IgM antibody right here. It's going to signal to some other antibodies. It's going to signal these IgG antibodies. Those are going to come in to a lower level, a delayed response there. And then what happens? We get over the infection and they come back down. We don't just have these sustained high levels of antibodies all the time. And so I actually ran some antibody testing for COVID antibodies on myself back in the day, just because I wanted to have a piece of paper that if anybody told me I needed to get vaccinated, I could tell them, why do I need to get vaccinated? I have the antibodies, and you can see it right here in my blood work. And what happened was Antibodies were elevated, and then they gradually started coming back down. And that's the body's normal immune response. So, surveillance of latent infection in normal animals depends on CD4 and CD8 T cells, suggesting that T cells might be capable of preventing establishment of latency. So what does that mean? We have the potential to have chronic viral infections where the body knocks that acute stage of that immune response down, but then we don't fully eradicate the viral infection, and it just sits there and kind of constantly bombards us. So a lot of people now are familiar with like long COVID and all these different cardiovascular symptoms and things that come up after you had COVID. And what happens with that a lot of times is that the immune system was keeping these other chronic infections at bay. We get COVID. COVID is a huge draw on the immune system. It pulls all of our resources over to trying to fight this infection. And that allows this infection that was just kind of sitting down here, not bothering anybody, to come back up to the surface and start wreaking havoc on the body. And then we can't knock it down because we don't have proper CD4 and CD8 cells. And so that starts kind of creating this latency, which has a chronic effect on the body. And so these are all things that we can kind of look at through blood work and getting a picture of where your immune system is at. So this is the, let's see here. This is the same patient. This was his second set of blood work. It came up. Everything's still low, but it got better. And then this is the third blood work we did, and everything came back to normal. So we were able to actually restore that immune response by looking at what was going on, understanding how the body functions, and being able to give specific nutrients and specific advice to help restore those pieces of the immune response.
How long did that take?
I could tell you if I looked at the dates, it was probably 8 months or so. It's not a quick response, but if you don't do anything, it's not going to change anything, right? So everything works together, everything works together. So what weakens the immune response? Well, we talked at the beginning about that shield and how the shield is supposed to get stronger as we age, but most people's shields get weaker as we age. And that's because most people aren't living healthy lives and doing the right things. And when we look at it, the CDC says that 6 in 10 Americans have at least one chronic disease, which means 60% of the people around us have at least one chronic disease, and 4 in 10 have two. So we are spending more money on medications and surgery and drugs, and we've got more science and more understanding of the human body than we've ever had before, yet somehow we're still sicker than ever. So clearly something that we're doing is not working. When it comes to avoiding chronic disease, heart disease, cancer, chronic lung disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes, kidney disease, these are all the leading causes of death. We donate more money and spend more money to researching all of these things than we ever have before, but it's our lifestyle and the things that we're doing on a regular basis that are destroying our health. Key lifestyle risk for chronic disease. This is the CDC's recommendation and solution to everybody. Obviously, limit tobacco use. Everybody knows not to smoke. That one's self-explanatory. Excessive alcohol use we should not have as well. Those two are pretty easy to understand. But the other two are very difficult to understand. So there's a lack of physical activity, which is, thanks for telling me that. I probably knew I needed to exercise, but what does that actually mean and what does that look for? No one's getting guidance in that. And then poor nutrition. Nutrition is probably one of the most understood / misunderstood / misinformed things out there. You can go online and find 10 different guys that will tell you 10 different things that are going to work for every single person. And it's very easy to just go online and get overwhelmed by the vast amount of nutritional information out there. So the public is not being guided in what we need to do to overcome a lot of these chronic illnesses and diseases. When we look at specifically what weakens the immune response, there's a lot of things that weaken the immune response. One of the most important is mental stress. How many people in this room have ever been mentally stressed before? If you aren't raising your hand, you're a liar. So we know the links between the psychological features of cancer risk and progression have been studied through psychoneuroimmunology. So the link between the brain, the nervous system, and the immune system. The persistent activation of the HPA axis in the chronic stress response and in depression probably impairs the immune response and contributes to the progression of some types of cancer. What does that mean? If you don't turn your brain off, it's going to increase your risk of getting cancer. It's been studied and we know it, but what are we doing with mental stress? You think we're getting better or worse when it comes to stress? Probably worse. Some people are getting better. Not everybody comes and sits in the front row right in the center either. So How about sugar? How many people know sugar is bad for you? How many people know why sugar weakens the immune response? Well, sugar actually competes for the same receptor site here as vitamin C on neutrophils. So this is the inside of a neutrophil, which are one of those bacterial going after cell types. And so when we have a lot of sugar, it's going to overweigh the vitamin C's response on that receptor, block it out so the vitamin C can't get in there, and then we're not going to have a healthy neutrophil. So we need to limit our sugar intake, especially when we're sick, but all the time if we want to build a strong immune response.
Now is fruit sugar okay, natural sugar rather than sugar?
You probably can't read that, but what's that say? Glucose. Well, I don't know how far you guys are. Glucose. Doesn't matter if the glucose comes from a piece of white bread or an organic apple. It doesn't. Your brain doesn't know the difference between organic apples and white bread when it comes to glucose. It all gets broken down to the same sugar. And you can eat a bunch of organic fruit and organic sugar. You're just going to be organically sick. So, it doesn't matter. It all gets broken down the same in the body. I've got about 2.5 hours worth of videos that I can send you that talk all about sugar and diet and how to build a healthy diet. So that'll be fun to put you to sleep tonight. So the role of physiological vitamin C concentrations on key functions of neutrophils isolated from healthy individuals. So again, vitamin C, very important for neutrophil function. Neutrophils, very important for bacterial infections. There's a very prominent health podcast guy that I listen to a lot, and he did a whole thing on how to prevent colds and flus. And it drove me nuts because he went in and he started talking about how vitamin C is not going to help prevent a cold and a flu. And I understand that vitamin C helps support neutrophils, which are for bacteria, and cold and flu are both viral infections, different pieces of the immune system. Of course, vitamin C is not going to help prevent cold and flu. It does different things, but I know that his audience doesn't know that. And so what he said was it doesn't specifically help with cold viruses and flu viruses, but what his audience heard was it doesn't help with my immune system and doesn't help prevent me from getting sick, which is why it's super important to understand how these different nutrients play a role in supporting the immune system so that we can utilize them appropriately to support in different areas.
So if you're having orange juice, that has lots of vitamin C, but it's also sugar, isn't it?
Yep. And it has yes, that's a whole nother discussion. But yes, so you want to get vitamin C from sources that are not full of sugar, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides. These are good questions. So loneliness predicts pain, depression, and fatigue, understanding the role of immune dysregulation. How many people remember when they told us all we had to work from home and quarantine in our houses and not go out in public and not talk to anybody and shut down all of our social structure?
I didn't listen.
Well, we all live in Florida. Of course we didn't listen. But loneliness, it suppresses the immune system, but that's the first thing they did. What else? Lack of movement. We know that physical activity is super important for immune function. What's the first thing they did also? Shut down all the gyms, shut down all the parks, prevented us from going and getting any physical activity. How about sleep? How many people were so stressed out during COVID they couldn't sleep? Well, we know that sleep depresses the immune system. So this study, they basically did 40 hours of sleep deprivation, and they said when people resumed normal sleep patterns, there was a prolonged decline in natural killer cell activities. So do you think that sleep deprivation over a long period of time is going to increase your cancer risk through the mechanism of depletion of natural killer cell activity? Smoking, we don't have to talk about. Medications, the number one grossing medication in 2020 was an autoimmune medication that blanket suppresses the immune response. So that's their answer for autoimmune conditions. I got a whole nother talk on autoimmune conditions that you can go listen to as well. But the answer to that is just shut the immune system down. If we end up in a COVID situation again, do you want to be taking a medication that suppresses your immune system? Probably not. Low vitamin D, super, super important. And then the typical American diet full of sugar and processed foods and chemicals and toxins, that's going to have a really negative impact on the immune system as well. So that's what weakens it. How do we build a strong immune system? That's what you guys all came here for. So we got to start with the barrier response. Remember, there's 3 different pieces of the immune system. So if we want to think clinically and critically about supporting it, we've got to support all 3 areas. So barrier function. Okay. think about a barrier, the normal immune response. This is our barrier right here. Easiest way to think about this is if I fall and scrape my elbow, I break the barrier, things that are on the concrete get into my skin, it gets a little bit red, we form a scab, gets a little bit itchy, that's that heparin, that histamine response, that's the signaling molecules kind of pulling all that immune cells in there. The key is we form a scab, it gets swollen, it gets red, it's painful, and then it goes away because the immune system did what it was supposed to do. I broke the barrier got healed, the immune system did what it had to do, it activated, and then it went back down again. What happens if I fall every single day and scrape my elbow in the exact same spot? It's never going to heal. And do you think that that little area of redness is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger? Yes. So number one is we've got to identify which barriers are being broken, what's breaking them, and stop breaking the barrier. If I'm trying to figure out why my arm's not healing, I've got to stop falling on the ground every day. That's the first thing. So where are those barriers located? We've got respiratory barriers, so that's everything that we're breathing in. If we're smoking and inhaling a bunch of carcinogens, if we're working in an environment that's full of chemicals, hairdressers, people who work in factories, machinery, things like that, they're constantly breathing in chemicals that are damaging those barriers. We've got the GI barriers in the gut. Ever heard of leaky gut? Leaky gut is responsible for a ton of different things. The genital urinary barriers, so people with chronic bladder infections, UTIs, cystitis, that type of stuff, and then nose and pharynx. So let's look at what we can do to support some of these different barriers. Respiratory barriers specifically, we've got OSHA, nettle, licorice, awesome supplements to help support in different ways depending on what's going on. So don't just go grab all three of these because you think you want to support your lungs. These two specifically do opposite things, so it's important to know what's going on. But all three of those are very important and helpful for supporting that respiratory barrier. GI barrier, things like chamomile, slippery elm, supporting that mucosal barrier there. Digest well, apple cider vinegar, lemons, those are all very acidic. They help to support the acid in the stomach. Acid, again, a very important chemical barrier as well. People get heartburn and indigestion all the time, and the first thing they do is go and reach for Tums or Prilosec or PPIs, which basically just neutralize that stomach acid, which is great because it helps you feel better, but it doesn't do anything to help support your body's normal function because the stomach being acidic is extremely important. Typically, and I'm not going to even get into that right now, but we want to support the mucosal barriers so we don't get the burning instead of just shutting down the acid, because the acid is part of that physiological response. So things like chamomile and slippery elm can both help to stimulate that GI epithelium outside of the presence of acid, and then we can work to slowly increase acid levels back up. We talk about chemical barriers. Our skin has a chemical barrier as well. Our skin is meant to be acidic. We've got a ton of bacteria on our skin that are super important. Think about a lot of hand soaps and things are lemon scented because the lemon juice is very acidic. Genital urinary epithelium, uva ursi. Uva ursi has been used for thousands of years to heal bladder infections and UTIs and things like that. And basically what happened was they were able to come up with the chemical compound that had the physiological reaction. And once you find the constituent within the herb that does the thing that you want it to do, then you can reverse engineer that, and then you can create it in a lab, and you can put a patent on it, and you can call it a medication. And so they came up with a bunch of medications that do the same thing as uva ursi does. The problem is a medication is not an entire complex of things that all work together. It's a single thing, and that's why they cause a lot of negative side effects. So using things like uva ursi, if you get UTIs, bladder infections, it's called an astringent. And what an astringent does is it helps to shrink and tighten membranes in the body. So we get these membranes that swell and spread apart. Astringents tighten. A lot of women will use astringents on their face to tighten up the skin. Same thing with the bladder wall. So if we're constantly getting these infections that are damaging that bladder wall, we can do something like uva ursi that will tighten that back up. Upper respiratory epithelium, albizia, very good at helping to calm down that histamine response as a response to allergies. Very good also for calming down the histamine response in your stomach and in your intestine. That wasn't the right thing. Okay, so barrier response. There's a lot of things that we can do to rebuild the barriers. The key is you can only do so much to rebuild if you're constantly breaking it down. So we've got to try to figure out what that stressor is that's breaking it down. If we're looking at the gut and leaky gut, we've got medications, stress, food particles, organ malfunction. There's all sorts of things that can cause that leaky gut. So you can take all the supplements in the world, but you can't out-supplement a bad lifestyle. I can't rub a bunch of Uva Ursi on my arm and hope it's going to tighten those membranes back up if I keep falling down every single day and skinning my elbow.
What's the definition of leaky gut?
Leaky gut is basically when the cells in your intestinal wall that are supposed to be really tight like this, they're called selectively permeable cells, which means that only certain things can pass through them. But when we have the presence of bacterial infections and certain organ malfunctions and medications and toxins and chemicals, causes those cells to swell, and when they swell, they break apart, and those tight junctions or gap junctions open up, and that allows things that are on the outside of the body to come inside, and that creates a lot of autoimmune conditions and things like that. So let's say leaky gut is the swelling and breaking apart of those tight junctions in the intestinal wall.
So when someone has leaky gut, what do they have? What is this? How does it manifest itself? In other words,
As
yeah.
like anything.
It could be.
I would say almost everybody, I pretty much operate under the assumption in our office that everybody has some degree of leaky gut going on. But it creates a lot of like global issues because it's having such a profound effect on the immune system and activation of inflammatory pathways and things like that. So a lot of times it's gas, bloating, inflammation, digestive discomfort, but leaky gut has been pretty well established as a precursor for almost all autoimmune conditions, which can affect any organ system in the body. A lot of mental health issues stem from leaky gut and from bacterial imbalances and things in the gut. So it can be a number of different things.
So if someone has a lot of gas or bloating, that would be leaky gut would be causing that. Is
I would say that the thing that's causing the gas and bloating is probably also causing the leaky gut. Lots of food allergies will show up with leaky gut. That's like, there's so many things it can cause. You can't just say like, this is the one symptom that tells you that you have leaky gut. But we look at stool tests all the time. We look at food allergy tests all the time. So we can tell pretty well whether or not someone has leaky gut. But yeah, almost everybody does. Okay, so let's look at what's supporting that innate immune response. So remember, we talked about all the different cell types over here. All those cell types come from these stem cells that are in the bone marrow. So if we want to support the overall immune response and support the body's ability to then differentiate those cells, however they need to be differentiated, astragalus is awesome. Astragalus is one thing I take every single day just to help basically feed my bone marrow so that my immune system has the chance to do what it needs to do. So we're providing all those upstream resources. Rehmannia, also very good at helping feed and support that bone marrow. And I'm going to skip over all this research stuff because you guys probably don't care that much about it. Chamomile, we talked about chamomile for protecting that mucosal barrier. Chamomile also very good at helping to support neutrophil function. So when we talk about bacterial infections, things like chamomile, very good at helping with that. Vitamin C, also very good at supporting neutrophils. You asked me where we can get good quality vitamin C from. That's not from sugar-containing citrus fruits. Camu berries and acerola cherries are the highest sources of vitamin C. There's still obviously going to be sugar in them because they're berries. The body stores a ton of vitamin C in our adrenal glands, which are little glands that sit on top of the kidneys. So the best animal-based source of vitamin C is going to actually be eating adrenal glands, which most people don't want to eat adrenal glands, or don't have access to eat them. So we have a supplement called Adrenal Glandular, which has adrenal glands and liver in it. So that would also be a very good source of vitamin C. How about supporting our monocytes? Elderberry. So we didn't really talk that much about the different cell types, but monocytes are going to be the first cell type that's going to respond to an infection coming into the body. They live at barrier functions. And what they're going to do, those macrophages and dendritic cells, they're going to engulf cells that are not supposed to be there, and they're going to hold up the flag that that cell is waving. And they're going to signal, and they're going to say, hey, we need help. Come over here and help me. This is what we're trying to do. This thing's not supposed to be here. And so they live at all of those barriers. So if we have leaky gut and something gets across that cell membrane or across the intestinal membrane, these macrophages and dendritic cells should start to kind of engulf those and start signaling that other part of the immune system. So if we start getting sick, one of the first things that we can do to support that monocyte activity is actually take elderberry. Elderberry, honeysuckle, and reishi work really well together to support that monocyte activity. How about natural killer cell function, anti-cancer function, antiviral function, echinacea, reishi, very important for that. We have so much research that's done, and actually the National Cancer Center recognizes the role of reishi mushroom, in supporting natural killer cells and its beneficial effect on actual chemotherapy treatment. But how many people know anybody who went through chemotherapy treatment and their doctor told them they should also be taking reishi? Probably not, because even though we know that it works, you can't put a patent on reishi and sell it for $1 million or $1 billion because it comes from the ground. So we have these things that are very highly researched that we know help support in these different areas, but for some reason, we're just not doing them. Reishi induces natural killer cell cytotoxicity, effects of echinacea associated with significant and sustained increase in the number of circulating total white blood cells, monocytes, neutrophils, and natural killer cells. So total white blood cells, monocytes, those first line defenses, neutrophils, bacterial infections, natural killer cells, viral infections, and cancer cells. So do you think that taking something like echinacea would be good to support a bunch of pieces of your immune system? And echinacea is one that I recommend for a lot of people. If you know you're going to be going somewhere that you're more susceptible to getting sick, that echinacea is going to be great to take for a month or two before you go into that environment to really help bolster that immune response. When we talk about our T lymphocytes, we've got wormwood, excellent for increasing T lymphocytes. Wormwood also super cool with kind of its correlation with COVID research. Wormwood, also called Artemisia, that's its plant name. Immunosuppressive effect of artemisinin and hydroxychloroquine. That's the one thing that all of us natural folks were running to get if we got COVID, and regulating the differentiation of CD4 cells, so helping with that signaling pathway. So super cool research on that. Chaga, really important for supporting our B lymphocytes. So we know what weakens the immune system. So when it comes to supporting the immune system, we've got to start with not doing things that are weakening the immune system, right? That makes sense. So if we want to build a strong immune system, we've got to make sure that we're managing our mental stress, decreasing sugar, getting out and socializing with people, getting good healthy movement, getting sleep, not smoking, avoiding medications that are going to damage the immune system, getting vitamin D, avoiding the typical American diet. And so what does that look like? We're not going to talk that much about allergies. Testing. So what can we do to support mental stress? Things like yoga, meditation, practicing gratitude. These are things that should be incorporated on a daily basis, not just when you're feeling overwhelmed every single day or on a routine every week. Managing our mental stress is a daily habit that we have to practice. Sugar, avoiding bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, lots of fruits. Again, your body doesn't know the difference between organic, healthy apples and oranges and white bread. It's all fruit. Now, I understand some people can't just give up fruit because they turn into hangry people and they want to go get road rage and kill their spouse and do all these bad things, right? So there are supplements that can help kind of ease that transition to giving up sugar. So things like Gymnema, Oregon grape, Coleus, those are all very helpful at managing your body's blood sugar regulation and your response to sugar. So if you are trying to get rid of sugar, we can help support that process so it's not as terrible for you. Loneliness, join a club. Pickleball clubs are awesome, right? Physical activity and social activity all at once. Work in an office, go back to work in your office. Don't hide at home. So many people are so resistant to going back into the office, and they end up just leaving their jobs because the job forces them to go back to the office. Socializing with family and friends, all very, very important. Going to church, that type of stuff. How about movement? We could have an entire hour-long talk just on physical activity and how we should be doing that. The biggest thing is getting some form of movement in every day. And I was just having a conversation with a patient the other day about the difference between activity and exercise. She was saying that she gets out and she weeds the yard and cleans up the leaves and all this stuff. And I was like, that's great for movement, but that is not physical activity, or it's not exercise. So when it comes to supporting the immune response, There's a lot of good research that talks about the effect of different exercise modalities on the immune system. And going out and cleaning the yard may be great for your mental health. It may be great to get some sunshine and some fresh air, but it's not going to have a beneficial effect on the immune system. So what we need to do is exercise, as in lifting weights and strength training 3 to 4 times a week. Exercise and lifting weights is extremely important for a ton of stuff. Getting walks in, sunrise or sunset, very important for mental health, for sleep pattern, for all sorts of stuff like that. In addition to strength training, we need to be getting some form of cardiovascular exercise in, medium, long, and short duration cardiovascular training. And when we're talking about cardiovascular training, your walk at sunrise and sunset does not count as cardiovascular training. You need to get to a level where you're beyond a conversational pace. I also have a ton of patients that go for walks all the time, and your little moseying around the block does not count as physical. It does not count as exercise.
But it's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing, but when I'm talking about doing exercise that's research proven to activate and support the immune response, going for a walk may help with a lot of these other things, your mental stress, your connection with your spouse, your loneliness, all that stuff, but it's not exercise. It's not cardiovascular training. So I'll probably get flack for that, but I don't really care. Vibe plates,
Your training would be like
running, swimming, riding a bike, using the rower. If you're going for a walk, what I always tell people is not everybody can just go and do those things. If you can get in a pool, you can walk in a pool, that's going to elevate your heart rate. You just got to do something that gets your heart rate up beyond conversational pace. So if you're going for a walk with your spouse and that's something that you already do, we also want to decrease the barrier of entry. So for a lot of people, going for a run is something that takes a lot of effort. But if you're already going for a walk, then walk faster or stop and do jumping jacks that gets your heart rate up, or do push-ups or squats, or incorporate something into your walk that elevates your heart rate beyond the point that you feel like you can maintain a conversation. Good.
I'm waiting for vibe plates. I don't know what that is.
Vibe plates are those little black boxes that we have over there, which are amazing for a ton of different stuff. That simulates movement, so it helps to move blood and lymphatic drainage and circulation, and it helps actually stimulate the bones the same way that strength training would. So from an avoiding osteoporosis standpoint, those things are awesome. But yeah, vibe plates are great. You can put them at your house. You can stand on them for 20 to 30 minutes a day. That is more of a cheat code because it will do a lot of the same things that actual physical activity and exercise will do. Getting adjusted, also very important. A lot of people can't move because they don't feel good, and getting adjusted can help you feel better so that you can move better. Sleep. Creating a bedtime routine is very important. And I've got a whole hour-long talk I did on all this stuff also. So we want to create a bedtime routine. We want to train the brain that when we start doing these things, we're preparing the brain for sleep. So when you walk into your room, if you've got a big old TV on the wall, and every time you get into bed, you turn the TV on, well, when your brain goes into the bedroom, it's expecting stimulation. It's not expecting relaxation. So getting the TV out of the bedroom is super important. Making sure that we're not staring at blue light right before bed. So avoiding screen time in the hour before bed. Avoiding stressful situations. If there's a conversation that you've been trying to have with your spouse all day, maybe don't do it the second you guys get into bed. Maybe try to plan that out for a different time of the day so that you're both not spiking your cortisol levels and having this very intense conversation right before bed. But doing things that are relaxing and calming and getting into a routine where, you know, at 9 o'clock, I have a glass of tea, I stop whatever I'm doing, I start brushing my teeth and taking my contacts out and going and reading and doing this stuff. Then as soon as we, get that glass of tea and we smell that, our brain is starting to shut down because it knows that these relaxing things are coming. That's very important. And a lot of people just can't turn their brains off, and they can't do any of those things for whatever reason. So there are 1,000 supplements that can help shut your brain off for you. But obviously taking supplements should not be the answer. And then the typical American diet. So prepare most of your meals at home, trying not to eat out as much as possible, avoiding things with ingredients that you can't pronounce. Shop on the outside of the grocery store, not the inside aisles of the grocery store. Get your food allergies tested so you can see what your body is actually responding to and what's creating an inflammatory response for you specifically. So I've got an hour-long video on this, an hour-long video on this, an hour-long video that encompasses all of these things. So we can't talk about all of this stuff in depth now, but if you want access to those, they're all on our YouTube page, and we can send you links for them. Or you can go to the Wellness Way Sarasota YouTube channel or the Dr. Connor Wolf channel, and you can find all those videos. So one last final thing, what type of supplements can we do to prevent our body or bolster our immune system as much as possible? Obviously, this is not going to outweigh all of this, but sometimes we just need a little bit of extra help because we can't be perfect everywhere. So things like astragalus, zinc, echinacea, immune glandular, those are all very great supportive supplements. First thing we should start doing when we get sick, ramping up the vitamin C, getting on some elderberry, antimicrobial stuff like colloidal silver. But we've got a whole long list of like 30 things over there that are all very good for different pieces of the immune system from a supplement standpoint. So if you are getting sick, let us know because we can tailor specific stuff to you, whether you've got gut infections, upper respiratory infections, you just got the cold or the flu, like everything. Your immune system is so intricate that we need to support in specific places based on what's going on. So feel free to reach out because we can always help with that. All right. Questions?
That was great.
Good?
Great. I asked my question.
All right.
No, one of the things, during all of the pandemic, I just did everything I normally did. And I met my friends and I did everything and I was fine.
Yep.
And my husband had he needed major surgery. And he said, I need to take the vaccine. And I said, fine, you can get the vaccine, but I will not get the vaccine. And what happened is that he couldn't get it because he was so sick and he was having so many issues with his back, and he was having the surgery, and every time he tried to plan it, there was some reason that he didn't. And he kept getting these things that, you're eligible for the vaccine. And I got the vaccine because I was afraid I was going to get COVID and give it to him and not allow him to have his surgery. And that was the only reason I got it, because for me and myself, I had no reason to have it. And now I think I've had COVID, and I know I've had COVID because he had like a shortness of breath and he took the test and he had COVID, and I said, well, I better take the test, and I had it. I was fine for the whole COVID.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any, I know I have it because the test says positive.
Yeah.
But I haven't had any kind of COVID where I've been sick.
Yeah.
And people
Well,
that are around me are sick.
Yeah. Well, people that are around you aren't doing the right things to support their bodies. So that's a perfect scenario where, like, by the time we get into the pandemic and it's here and I don't know your husband, so I'm not speaking specifically about your husband, but you're 50 pounds overweight and you eat McDonald's every single day and you don't exercise and you don't sleep well and you don't, like, it's too late at that point. That's why we want to start doing these things now to support our immune system so that we know that if something like that's going to come in the future, we're not going to have issues with it. And Jennifer, you can shut the recording off also. But I'm going to have to log in the computer. But yeah, now that we're through it and we've seen what happened, the Wellness Way got huge during COVID because we were talking about all this stuff and everybody told us we were crazy and going to kill people. And now that we're on the other side of it, all the